Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Health and Human Performance Through the Lens of Traditional Chinese Medicine. So before we get started, I'd like to thank our hosting university, Concordia University, Chicago, who offers 100% online bachelor's, master's, and doctorate programs in exercise science. They offer 50% transfer credit and a tuition guarantee, which means your costs won't change on you while you study with them. So before I pass things to Andy, I'd like to note that we'll have time for questions at the end. You are also welcome to ask any questions in the chat throughout the presentation. And with that, I will pass things over to Andy.
Thanks, Naomi. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Hello from Hong Kong, all the way from Hong Kong. And just before I get started, I just would like to share my contact information in case you have any lingering questions after the webinar, or if you have any feedback, because your feedback is critical to my development as a presenter and as an educator. So I just want you to know that if you do have anything, any questions or any feedback, feel free to just send me a message. And, 6 years ago, I was walking kind of on the streets of Hong Kong, and we all know that the health and fitness industry, the space has grown so much over the past decade or so. And if I go out on the street in Hong Kong, you find many fitness instructors, because just within a 1 kilometer distance within my neighborhood, I think there are 30 studios. I'm not even joking with you. There are over 30 studios. So, I was walking around on the street and I was looking around at all these instructors, and I just thought to myself, how can I differentiate? Because certainly when I go out there, fitness people, they have nice physiques. And then if you go online, everyone seems to have 1,000 acronyms right next to their name currently, if you go on social media. So I was really struggling, because I figured if I couldn't find my space in this industry, there really is no place for me to exist. And so I kind of, the main question that I was thinking is, what can I do for my athletes and for the industry? Because I knew that if we can do something for the athlete and for the industry, this would be way more helpful than me just thinking, what can I do? Because then we're thinking from the athlete perspective, and then we're coming from a service point of view. So all that to say, sometimes we just need to take a step back and think about what we can do for the industry in order to kind of develop our career and to find our place in this competitive industry. And the image that changed my career really is this one with Michael Phelps at the Rio 2016 Olympics. As you can see, there are cupping marks on his back. And ever since this picture, the fitness community, it blew up, because people began being interested in traditional Chinese medicine, or the modalities that people have been using for thousands of years. Yet I think most of us would agree that many people who have seen these techniques are also misinformed in the fact that there isn't a reliable information out there that can clearly and concisely explain what traditional Chinese medicine is all about. So that planted a seed for me to do something in the future. And then, of course, I was a master's student in the Concordia University Chicago exercise science program. And in there was a statistics course, or a research design and statistics, where we get to have an assignment where we could pick a PICO question to research on. So a PICO question is where you figure out a question that you're trying to answer using evidence. And for me, I thought it was the perfect time to look at the efficacy of cupping, just because why not, right? I wanted to look into the evidence, to look into the research, to see what does the evidence say about this particular modality. And as I was going through this assignment, I realized that there are 2 perspectives whenever it comes to Chinese medicine or its modalities. And one is the human movement science perspective. So if you look into the research, a lot of the research would talk about the soft tissue. So let's say if I apply cupping or gua sha scraping or acupuncture, what is happening to the state of my soft tissue? Has it become loosened? Has it become more fluid, etc.? This second perspective was the Chinese medicine perspective. And this is where things got a bit mystical as well, because I realized, even as a Chinese person, so a little bit of my background, I was born and raised in Hong Kong before spending 10 years in the United States for school. And And even me as a Chinese person, I couldn't understand the language that they were using in its terminologies. So what I found was that by using terminologies that I didn't understand, it didn't help me understand the philosophy. And so I figured I need to leverage this opportunity to share with the world, or at least find out what Chinese medicine is all about, so that those who are interested in health and fitness can at least be on the same page, or at least be closer to the same page as those who are interested in traditional Chinese medicine. And so I continued developing the idea in my capstone experience. So for our master's program, as for our partner project, we have different options in terms of what we can do. And for me, I wrote a book proposal. This would be the first proposal that I've written on what I have in mind in terms of our book. And then after the final project, I collaborated with Dr. Sally Wong, who holds a PhD in Chinese medicine from the University of Hong Kong. And then we submitted our book proposal to 3 different publishers, as this is really the first book of its kind that examines Chinese medicine and strength and conditioning, health and performance, etc. 3 publishers were really interested in publishing our work. And at the end, we chose the one that we're currently working with. And then so far it's done okay. So we've got #1 new release on the first day of its launch, and then Amazon bestseller, all of that. But basically, after this, nowadays on a day-to-day basis, I mainly work with golfers of all levels to improve their performance on the fields. And I also give presentations to different corporations. I just gave one last night to an international law firm. And then because of my book, I'm able to appear in over 30 podcasts so far this year. And all that to say, you want to leverage every opportunity. I think a lot of times, back to my internal struggles. With so many people being educated, right? I do think that education is bare minimum right now, because you have to be educated in order to stand out, in order to know what you're talking about. And a lot of people just have this mindset that, okay, I'll just get my degree, I'll have the acronyms next to my name and then stand out. But you don't, because the ones who really stand out are the ones who maximizes every opportunity. And for me, I'm fortunate enough to utilize my master's degree, different courses, the capstone experience, and then having publishers value my work and the mentality. And so I would encourage you all to start the presentation that regardless of what you do this week, that you think about, okay, how can I make the most out of this opportunity so that I can continue to develop as a health and fitness professional. So that is my story, and I'd like to know yours. So I'd love if you can type in the chat, whether you are a current student, alumni, potential student, or if you're not affiliated with Concordia at all, if that's the case, and what do you currently do?
So the responses from people are that there's a master's student from the University of Florida, a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine based in San Francisco.
Oh, yes, I see it. Yeah, I see it.
Currently in post-professional doctoral programs for women's health, a physical therapist in Las Vegas, traditional Chinese medicine professional from Barcelona, an ex-powerlifter and casual trainer, engineer during the day, postgrad student from Chapman University, a neuro Pilates teacher, and I teach people how to get out of pain through movement. Wing Chun instructor in Florida, LMT and Tai Chi practitioner, massage therapist, personal trainer, yoga, Qigong practitioner, getting my master's in social work. I have a background in exercise science, psychology and nutrition, physical therapy student, professor of Chinese language and culture, strength and conditioning specialist, acupuncturist, HR professional, personal passion for exercise movement, interested and curious for my own development and education.
Cool. Well, it looks like we have quite a diverse audience. So if anyone would like to add in, or if any feedback, again, just type into your chat. Although I probably would answer the questions later, depending on the amount of time we have. But thank you so much for participating so far. Continue doing so. So let's move on. Focus areas of today there are three questions that we really want to address, and those are, what is TCM about? So in a concise manner. Although sometimes I must say, whenever I deliver these presentations, I have to be open and honest here. Sometimes we have no idea who the audience will be in terms of its background and its understanding on the subject. So it is my goal to make it as easy and easily digestible as possible. So those who are expert in the area sometimes might even feel like I'm oversimplifying it. But that is because what I have in mind is strength and conditioning coaches, human movement, science professionals without any knowledge in Chinese medicine. So if you do feel like I'm oversimplifying, please know that I'm just trying to get people to understand what traditional Chinese medicine is all about, because we're trying to take steps towards people having an understanding of different cultures. So that's a little disclaimer. And then second, why should we integrate principles of traditional Chinese medicine for human performance? And then we also want to know that. And three, how can we integrate that into our daily routine? Because what we ought to know is that TCM is a very practical philosophy. It is not something that you just sit there and talk about. And so if we know the theory, but don't apply it into our lives, then we've wasted our 1 hour presentation. So I'd love to make this presentation practical as well. So 3 focus areas. First, why is TCM important? Well, this is written from a fitness professional point of view. So this is Eduardo Santos. He is a physical therapist. He's a Brazilian physical therapist now based in Shanghai. And fun fact, he's actually the highest paid physio in the soccer world. And thankfully, he's actually one of the endorsers for my book, Dynamic Balance. We connected a few months ago. And if you watch any of his interviews, he'll tell you, you'd be surprised at where you end up working with. So he was before working in China, he was working in Russia with some top soccer players. And then he got so famous that the Chinese figured they'll pay, 7-figure to get him working for one of the soccer clubs here in Shanghai. And then once he came to Shanghai, right, he shared one time that he would obviously use his methodologies, which is more westernized, right? But then you've got localized players who would be using TCM. And as a sports medicine professional, he had to gain their respect, or he had to gain their trust in order to treat them, right? Which meant that he needs to be well-versed in Chinese medicine. And if we apply this to your career, sometimes you have no idea who you're working with, because even in the US, you can look at a lot of NBA teams, you can look at Olympic athletes. Some of them are interested in Chinese medicine. So as a fitness professional, for your career development, it will be beneficial for you just to at least know kind of the basic concepts of traditional Chinese medicine. And who knows, you might end up like Eduardo one day, making 7-figure. But that depends on what comes our way, I guess. But anyways, quote on bottom, be prepared for the next life-changing opportunity, because you never know what might come your way. Just like me, talking to you now from Hong Kong on behalf of Concordia University, Chicago. Still a bit surreal. And then, so I'm going to talk about the balanced state. And I'm going to quote William Shakespeare, "A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet." So this is actually inspired by an interview that I did with the College Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association. And we're talking about the balanced state. And obviously, as part of my project, I wanted to understand what's the difference between Chinese medicine and kind of the Western conventional medicine. What I discovered is that actually, they're not so far apart. And it's just that they have different subset of languages to explain this balanced state, because we know that it is within this balanced state that we perform best. And what is this balanced state? Well, if you look at the East versus West, in the West, certainly in any physiology course, you will learn of homeostasis. So the self-regulating process that the body goes through to survive and to thrive, really. And if you look at the left, there are different languages or different vocabularies that we use in physiology. So if you got your pH, you've got your temperature, oxygen levels, hormones, neurotransmitters, etc., etc. But if you think of it, thousands of years ago, people in ancient cultures would not have access to all these amazing fancy lab equipment that could tell us all these indicators or all these markers of our body. And what they did instead was that they used another set of languages to help them understand the world, to help them communicate with different body signals so that they can treat sickness and to prevent illness. And so if you look at the East, whenever they talk about balanced circulation or a balanced body, they will use these set of languages: Qi, blood, five phases, yin yang, zhang, fu, and meridians. So for my presentation, I want to just give you an overview of what these six terms actually mean, because I think these terms are ubiquitous, they're quite prevalent, you see them everywhere, but it is also where the confusion happens. So for the rest of the presentation, we're going to briefly talk about each term so that you have a basic understanding. And before that, we're going to talk about the premise of traditional Chinese medicine. As you can see, that is my book that I co-authored with Dr. Wong. And ultimately, good health relies on the maintenance of harmony between the body and the surrounding environment, hence dynamic balance. Because if you think of our internal body, it is always adapting to the surrounding environment. So things are always dynamic. And furthermore, we can also say that Chinese medicine is more of a preventative medicine, because essentially the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to set up a body in a way that we can cope with whatever comes our way. For example, I'm not sure if you can hear my background, but it's actually pouring here in Hong Kong right now. And so my internal body is going to feel a bit different, right? My mood changes, kind of my body, my energy level changes. So I have to make sure I do things that can help me cope with the current season and the current weather. And that's what TCM is all about. So if you think of factors that can upset good health, they could be both internal and external. So usually internal would be the usual focus of conventional Western medicine, right? So what is happening to the body? If something's happening to the body, I'm going to implement strategies that can help me fix. So I might take pills, I might have different treatments. But the biggest differentiation in Chinese medicine is that it's believed that external factors can greatly influence how the body feels as well. So you've got your season, you've got your climate and geographical location. What I found is over the past 4 months, when I go on podcasts, right? When I tell people that, oh, actually both internal and external factors can upset good health, podcast hosts are usually a bit skeptical of the external factors. They'll be like, wait, really? And then I tell them, well, for example, I always use the analogy of my Thanksgiving story back in 2007. So I was looking, 2008, I was looking at universities, and it was Thanksgiving break in November. I had a week off from school, and my parents flew over from Hong Kong just so that we can visit different colleges so that I can decide on where to go for university. In high school, I went to school in Connecticut. I went to local prep school in Connecticut. And so we were looking at colleges in Boston. We were there for 3 days, and then we flew to LA to look at the universities there. And so you can imagine Thanksgiving, we're walking around Boston, checking out Boston University, Boston College. It was cold, it was freezing, it was dark at like 5 p.m. But we were used to that because that's kind of how things are in that part of the country. And of course, we flew to Los Angeles, and then all of a sudden, you see all these people in short shorts, they're in tank tops, they're partying, and they're having a good time, being in a good mood late into the night. So, and your mood changes. And so I always say that it's super real that our energy levels could change depending on wherever we're at. And that is a key differentiator between Chinese medicine and Western medicine. So as you approach your lifestyle, you can think about how your mood or your body state is changed by, or it's influenced by your surrounding environment. So that is the premise of traditional Chinese medicine. Now we're going to go into the concepts: Qi, blood, yin yang, 5 phases. So the part that gets, or I guess the part that people gets misinformed when it comes to Chinese terminology is that if you think of every Chinese terminology, there are 2 meanings. One, a functional meaning, and second, a conceptual meaning. And usually it's within the conceptual meaning that people get confused. And I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit, but just know that each TCM term has both a functional meaning and a conceptual meaning. So here's me playing soccer in 2000, and I'm forgetting all these years, but it should be 2014. I had the chance to go professional here in Hong Kong. Although in the end, I wasn't offered a contract, but it was certainly an eye-opening experience to train with professional athletes. And if you look at the bottom, it will say I'm lacking qi when running. In the Chinese culture, whenever you go exercise, and let's say you go running, I go play soccer. If I'm running out of gas, there's an idiom kind of, I'll just say, oh, I'm lacking qi, or I'm not having enough qi. If you ask any of the Chinese speakers, or if you ask any Chinese person, what do you actually mean by lacking qi? They will not be able to explain to you what it actually means tangibly. Because this saying of I'm lacking qi in the Chinese culture is more of a metaphorical, conceptual saying. What we're trying to say, or what they're trying to say, is that we're lacking in energy. And so if you think about qi, again, there are two meanings attached to it, right? One, the functional meaning, and second, the conceptual meaning. So functionally, qi just means energy. And it is believed that every single thing or the universe contains different energy. It is also philosophical because you cannot see it, right? If you ask a practitioner what qi is, they will say, well, we cannot see it because it's more of a conceptual idea. Yet people would say, well, if it's a conceptual idea, it's not real. But that's not the case because functionally it's describing how it gives us energy. And in fact, if you look at the Chinese language, qi is rarely used on its own, meaning in the vocabulary, it is always paired with something. So if you talk about the atmosphere, if you talk about steam, if you talk about petroleum gas, there are two character words that would always include the word qi. So in fact, in the US, people would be like, oh, your qi is not good. But qi is rarely used on its own in Chinese culture, in other words. So just know that that's why if you look at a Chinese medicine book, they will say, oh, it can translate to air or it can translate to energy, just because it is used in quite a broad context, as it can also have a conceptual meaning attached to it. Blood, on the other hand, it's much broader because it is talking about how it delivers nutrients to different parts of the body. And conceptually, it is referring to how it brings nourishment to the body. So in that sense, it is quite similar, but much broader than Western conventional medicine. And together, qi blood is used to describe circulation. And so quite often, if you go to a practitioner to be like, oh, your qi good is flowing and qi blood is not good, because this is their language in explaining circulation. And then here's another participation question. We would like to know your health and performance this past week. And in your screen right now, you're going to see that there are two categories, and there are 12 words. And I want you to type into the chat the words that describes your week. You're going to have more than one. I would encourage you to type all of them before you click enter so that you don't have to click enter 1,000 times. So just put down words that describes your week. So far we have driven, energetic, smooth skin, imaginative. Imaginative, I'll explain it as, let's say, you're not so rigid, like you have a lot of ideas that you would like to implement. Like in a meeting, for example, when people ask for your input on something, you have something valuable to share and you have ideas to share. Versus you being there clogged up and not having anything to share. Exactly, yeah, inspiration created. Perfect, seems a lot of us are doing quite well. So it probably didn't take long for you to figure out that category 1 it contains indicators of harmonious qi blood. And because if you look at category 2, it is really describing things that hinders kind of our health and human performance. So category 1 is there are indicators of harmonious qi blood. And in Chinese medicine, if you do contain words that are from category 2, it has a system in categorizing imbalances. And in fact, there are 9 common body constitutions, as people refer to, that explains your current circulation and your current health. And one of them being good health, where it is mostly words from category 1, because that tells us that you're thriving and you're having harmonious chi blood. But if you don't, then you can fall into one of the 8 categories that can explain your current condition. And then the image on the right, different modalities will be used depending on your constitution. So just know that whenever you have your chi blood or your circulation is not flowing as good as it should be, your treatment really is dependent on your context. So we have to take everything into consideration. So if we continue our presentation, we'll know that, again, there are both internal and external factors that can upset our balance. On the left are the ones that people are quite familiar with: your lifestyle, your diet, emotions, your activity levels, recovery quantity and quality. And then external will be where you're at, the season, and the climate. So that is chi blood in 5 minutes. Hopefully it makes sense so far. And then we're going to talk about balance and harmony. So we're going to move on to yin yang and 5 phases. So if you think of the following terms: summer, winter, day, night, hot, cold, happy, sad, fast, slow. Any observations? I suppose this is more of a rhetorical question, because I think that the answer is quite obvious, so you don't have to put it to the chat. We're talking about opposites here. The sign is ubiquitous. You can certainly see it everywhere. I mean, when I was in the States, you see it sometimes in some dodgy places. And so it's just frustrating, because in Hong Kong, you see it in better places than you would in the US. But anyways, right? So the yin philosophy describes the relationship between 2 opposite yet complementary forces. So that's the technical definition. What does it actually mean? Well, first of all, we have to know that neither yin or yang are inherently bad by nature. And, oh, sorry, okay, so I think I missed one slide. So we have to go back to each TCM terminology having 2 meanings. And functionally, the yin yang sign, it just means that literally things happens in opposites, right? If you think of the terms, summer, winter, day, night, they're all relative to one another. So functionally, it just means that things that are in opposites. Yet it is also a conceptual term, because it can be applied to everywhere. If you think about yin yang, neither of them are inherently bad by nature, but a sustained state of yin or yang is insidious. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think of yin, usually what it's referring to is things that are slower or more gentle. Hence the word in yoga, if you have been to yoga classes before. And if you think of yang, it's a metaphor for activities that are more rigorous and faster and aggressive. So if you think of it, strength and conditioning, really at the core of it is a yang activity, because we're trying to work our body aggressively so that it can adapt to a stress to become stronger. Yet, I would say over the past few years, we've realized that stronger is not necessarily better, because we can't always just be training hard. We have to pay attention to recovery. And this is the yin yang sign at work, because now we realize that we need to take a more balanced approach. Okay, so if we're going hard for 4 or 5 weeks, we actually need to have a deload week, just so that we can take the stress off the body. We can implement different strategies to get us back. But this is all yin yang philosophy at play. And certainly if you look at sitting, for example, so sitting is more of a restful activity. It is more of yin. It resembles yin a bit more. And yet if we sit for a long time without movement, it also causes all sorts of problems, as we all know as fitness professionals. So, and then that's why we always say that in the classic Tai Chi sign, there's a hint of black in white and a hint of white in black, because too much of a good thing or seemingly good thing can become bad in the case of strength and conditioning. Too much training ultimately can be insidious for the body and can harm the body. and sitting, resting in general, which seems good for the body, too much of it can also be disastrous because it will lead to all sorts of problems. That's why you would find a hint of black in white and a hint of white in black, which is a bit philosophical. And this could be applied to everywhere. And if you think of this, applying this to Qi blood, right? So our circulation can also be yin or yang, right? It could be, the analogy that people give is, think of your body like a highway. So energy, there are different cars on the highway, and traffic could be nice and smooth as category 1. Traffic is nice and fluid so that different things are working properly. But then you've also got people who are speeding, right? So that would be in a yang state, right? When things are flowing too much, right? If you have too much coffee, for example, then people will be speeding, and that's also quite dangerous for the entire traffic system. On the other hand, congestion or any type of traffic could be annoying, right? If you think about accidents, like if we have injuries or something, then it's also going to clog up the road, and this will make your energy a bit more yin because it's going to slow down the energy. So the yin yang philosophy can also be applied to your Qi blood. And then whenever you go to a practitioner, they would use these languages to explain your current energy level so that they can figure out the type of imbalance that you have. Because having too much Qi blood or having not enough, they're completely different things, and you should have a different treatment strategy as a result. So then we're going to move on to 5 phases. Sometimes you're going to see this as 5 elements. We decided to use translation 5 phases just because we think this better captures the essence of the 5 phases. Sometimes when you hear the words 5 elements, Stella and I, my co-author, we both think that sometimes the movies portray this as like a Pokemon element, right? Oh, here are 5 elements that created the worlds and yada, yada, yada. But that's not what it represents. What the Chinese wanted to do is they wanted to understand the world. Remember, just a few slides ago in the Qi blood sign, we talked about how conceptually the Chinese believe that everything has Qi, because if something has energy, something has Qi. And at the end of the day, the world is interconnected. So there has to be a system where we try to understand the world and the interconnected relationship between different objects and different concepts of the world so that we can understand how to treat it according to nature. Because the closer we can live to the rules of, or according to the rules of nature, the better we'll thrive, because that's what our bodies are designed to do. Something that I think is super logical, right? And so in the Chinese language, 5 phases is actually a translation meaning like a planet, because a planet is always changing. So phases would better capture the ever-changing nature the 5 phases represents, as in things are never just constant. Well, what do I mean by that? Essentially, 5 phases is a categorical system that helps us break down different things and the relationship of them. So if you think of different concepts that I've listed on the slide, your season, your taste, your organ, and your emotion are actually categorized by the 5 phases. So they're arranged in a particular order to represent that the nature cycles through stages of transition. For example, if we apply the 5 phases to a geographical location, there will be different seasons throughout the year. And so they will have a season attached to a phase. So if you see here, there are spring, summer, late summer, fall, and winter, and there will be a phase attached to it. And as we said, there's also an organ attached to it, because this is a way for us to understand different things in nature, and they just categorize it based on its nature. So if you look at spring in Chinese medicine, you go online sometimes and it'll be like, oh, 10 foods that you should eat for the winter, or 10 foods you should eat to prep your body for the summer. Again, because the way to understand the philosophy behind them suggesting these type of foods is that we have to understand, first of all, there's Qi blood, and our Qi blood, our circulation is influenced by both internal and external factors. So if it is influenced by external factors, we have to understand what is the nature of those external factors. And so if we can categorize those external factors, then we'll have a strategy to implement against it, because at the end of the day, TCM is a preventative medicine. if you come back to the chart, you'll see that there are different seasons and different organs, which actually means that now we know in the summer, I should take a look at the heart. So I should eat foods that strengthens the heart because that's going to help me cope with the season. And that's how you use 5 elements, because you want to implement strategies that fits the current season, that fits the current phase, so that you can cope with whatever comes your way. And they also categorize things such as taste, right? It is believed, the ancient Chinese believe that each taste stimulates a reaction from the body. And I would like to highlight sweetness, right? So if you look at sweetness right in the middle, earth, sweet, the flavor action is moisten and nourishes. People figured it out thousands of years ago that sweet taste, it gives us energy and it more nourishes our body. And obviously we now know that, sugar, carbohydrates, it gives us energy and nutrition. But people figured this out a couple thousands of years ago, which I've always thought it's quite fascinating. But obviously we're talking about natural sweetness here. And so quite often, if you kind of put the table together, you'll find that at the current season, people say that you should eat more bitter stuff, or you should eat more salty stuff in the winter if you live in Massachusetts, just because it can help store water and it can help you cope with the season. It can help you cope with the season. So we've got a question: why is fire linked with bitter? To be honest with you, it's beyond my scope. I actually didn't look into the question of why bitter and fire. And all I know is that they've categorized it this way, but it's a very good question. And let me do some research and get back to you, Reed. Thanks for asking that. But yeah, this is how they categorize, and so a certain flavor action will help you cope with the season. So how do we apply this? Back to my example, when Thanksgiving break, I was looking at colleges in both Boston and LA, which happened to be pictures of both. So on the left, you've got somewhere in Boston, and on the right, you've got Los Angeles. And the question I always ask podcast hosts is, let's say if you're sitting in cold Boston right now or hot LA, in which environment would you prefer to have coconut water? And I think the answer is quite intuitive, because you can have coconut water sitting next to a beach, and we do know that coconut water has a cooling effect, meaning that it could calm the chi down. So what this tells us is that our diet is dependent on our surrounding environment. And the 5 phases, they help the ancient Chinese in understanding the interconnected relationship of our body and nature. So it could help us make better food choices according to the taste of it, because it has a flavor action. And then 2, because it helped us understand different organs. So eating the correct taste would help us correspond to the right organs so that we can thrive, because seasons can also be categorized using the 5 phases system. So really it's a system, again, to help us make better choices and to connect the dots when it comes to understanding the relationship of nature. So if we apply that, how do we apply that to performance? Well, training outcome depends upon the body's ability to tolerate, recover from, and adapt to training stress. I think I read the book in the periodization textbook. And we know that rigorous training is a yang activity. And therefore, we know, which we have been over the past few years, that we have to put more emphasis on yin activities like recovery. So essentially, we're applying the yin yang philosophy to performance. And also, if we think of the 5 elements, we now know that foods can elicit different responses throughout the changes in seasons and climate. You're not going to have a hot chocolate on a clear summer day sitting at the beach in Cancun. Hopefully not, because if you do, then fine. But I think most people would not make that choice. And what this tells us is that there are different foods for different seasons. And if we can just eat according to what we should, according to the season and geographical location, then we're going to live better and thrive in our environment. So applying the yin yang philosophy to your life, and at this point, just look at time. Yeah. So if you look at TCM, essentially what TCM is interested in is whether the body is able to maintain homeostasis. And so far, we've talked about how TCM terms have both a physical and conceptual meaning. And Qi blood is the TCM way to describe circulation. So the next time when you read a post on the internet or when you talk to a practitioner, when they tell you all your Qi and blood, know that ultimately it's their way to describe circulation. And when things don't, when your Qi blood is not flowing as they should, there are different ways to describe imbalances. And then the treatment is always dependent on your current body constitution. And although we do know cupping and gua sha is great, it is not necessarily the best for your current constitution. And that is a keynote to jot down. So just because something looks good, it doesn't mean that it is good for you, because even some treatments are dependent on the season. And well, how do we know the season and what to do? Well, the five phases are there to explain the interconnected relationship between everything. And it is there to help us understand the relationship between different things and what to do in season. But if you take nothing away from today's webinar, please use the yin yang philosophy and know that it is actually applicable everywhere, because it is quite a logical concept as it explains two contradictory yet complementary concepts. It is referring to how we can't just go hard. We have to take some time to digest, right? If you think of my presentation today, I get to come to you today because as a strength and conditioning coach, I was interested in TCM. But to write a book requires obviously hard work, but it also requires imagination, because I sometimes have to just sit there and have some downtime in order to think about what to incorporate. Because, just like this webinar today, you're going to find that within Chinese medicine, you have so many small questions as I research onto the topic. But it's so easy to go off tangents. So sometimes I just have to close my laptop, sit there and rest. And so one quote that I have from Dynamic Balance that I actually quote from Professor Cal Newport from his book, Deep Work, is that we have to embrace boredom. So essentially embrace boredom is quite a yin. If you think of yin yang again, it's more of an yin activity, because boredom, you're not really doing anything, but it is within boredom that we get all these imaginative ideas, that all these things hits us. And so I would encourage you to think of that the next time perhaps you go on social media to kill time, or when you think of things to stimulate the brain, that perhaps downtime is actually what you need, and recovery is what you need in order to grow your muscles, in order to elicit an adaptation from the amount of stress that you put in when it comes to training. And then some final thoughts is that both internal and external factors can upset dynamic balance, illustrated by the fact that you being in different parts of the country can elicit a different energy. And so start observing how you feel whenever there is a change in external environment. And since TCM is a preventative medicine, start applying the yin yang philosophy to your own life, right? I shared with the story about how my dynamic balance idea could not have come to fruition without the downtime. And just like many other things in life, we live in a society where there's just stimulus after stimulus being thrown at us. So from an emotional point of view, we do have to take some downtime. And then after that, once you figure out that after all, life is all about balance, I truly believe that everyone will thrive. And hopefully the next time I talk to you guys, everyone will be in category 1, because that's what we ought to be. And that's where we perform best. So that'll be my presentation so far. Just let me look into the chat. Can we see the slide with season and organ, please? Because of time constraint, I actually did not go into organs. So we have to keep in mind that the TCM organs is a bit different to the Western organs, in that the Western organs are describing physical structures, but in Chinese medicine, they're categorized according to their function. meaning that it's sometimes not a physical structure when you say heart. It's referring to its functions. But we don't, sorry to say, we actually don't have time to go into that, unfortunately. Go back to the question slides.
And there's a question. I'm curious about our intersection.
I'm curious if
and periodization macrocycles.
Sure. Well, if you stick to Chinese medicine, then there should be, because I'm gonna give you a practical example, right? I'm gonna use a lot of soccer examples because that's the most I'm familiar with. If you think about soccer, right, in Europe, in most countries other than England, they actually take a break in the winter. So the season goes from, a bit of context. So the soccer season goes from September to May, or August to May. And in December in Italy and in France and other parts, they take a 2 week off because it is too cold to play. And so if you think of that, in those 2 weeks, it is a good time for the body to recover. Because first of all, the body's not designed to play soccer when it's 0 degrees out. And so if there's definitely intersection, because in those 2 weeks, you can actually apply Chinese medicine to help them cope with such cold weather so that when they do play again in 2 weeks time, that they can thrive. So there's definitely intersection, especially in places where there are more extreme weather.
And there's a question, have you done any work around the connections between meridians, facial lines, fascia lines, biotensegrity, and movement?
Yes, in Diabounds, we devote we devoted 2 chapters to it. This is a big topic of mine, or big interest of mine, because after all, I'm a movement professional that is interested in TCM. And so far, in concise and short answer to that is there's been a lot of talks saying that, so you know how there are 12 meridians, or basically there are 12 TCM meridians, but there are also 12 fascia meridians. And sometimes people will make the connection that, so are fascia lines the physical form of the TCM meridians? Because again, TCM meridians, functional conceptual meaning, which means that you cannot, when you ask the TCM practitioner to be like, you cannot see the meridians, because again, it's more of a concept that energy are transferred through these channels into different parts of the body. But my personal opinion is that it is unfair to say that they're the same thing, just because I think we just don't have conclusive evidence saying that the fascial lines and the meridians are the same thing. Although I would say they are very similar when it comes to describing how the body is interconnected, how what's happening to the toe can affect the headaches you have, and how when it comes to movement. So 5,000 years ago, people would be doing interconnected movements. So they'll be doing a lot of movements. If you look at Qigong, if you look at dances, if you look at different forms of historic movements, they've all been based on the idea of flow and elegancy, right? So intuitively, we know what an elegant movement looks like because that's what we've been training for. And this applies to not only Chinese medicine, but if you look at every other human nature, we have always been looking at interconnected, smooth, fluid movement, right? Yet, I think it's only when bodybuilding came about, nothing against bodybuilding, that we disrupted the idea that we need to train total body movement, because all of a sudden we went into training isolated muscles. But thankfully, thanks to things like animal flow or different body movement, prime movement, movements or popularity of these ideas, that we realized that actually the body's interconnected, and what happens to the toes can influence what happens in my head, right? And so I do think that people are again talking about the same things, and so I'm excited to see what happens in 10 years, because then I think people will slowly realize that actually the ancients have figured this out long ago, that we should train movement, we shouldn't train muscles, but unfortunately, I think the fitness industry is still catching up to that. Hopefully that answers the question. And then next question, I have a question about emotions impacting health. What does that look like? Oh, well, we also have a Emotions there's also a category system in emotions in TCM, but the simple way to do it is to apply the yin yang philosophy as we have today to emotions, right? If you think about emotions, again, we have to recognize that emotions are not inherently bad. So the reason why I say is sometimes people think of stress as a bad thing, right? But if you think of stress, a little bit of stress is good because it gets us to the deadline. If I don't have stress today, I wouldn't have completed the slides. I wouldn't have completed the talk for me to talk to you today. Yet, thankfully, Naomi and John reached out a month ago to ask me about this, to ask me to host this webinar. Because if they asked me last week, I'll be so stressed that I wouldn't be able to put together a nice, coherent presentation. So all that to say, whenever we talk about emotions, we can apply the yin philosophy, right? A little bit of it is good, too much of it is bad. Like stress, when you think of sadness, people want to avoid sadness and all, but sometimes a little bit of it is important because without the sadness, we're not going to understand the happiness. I don't want to get philosophical, but but that's essentially what it is. So to me, it's not really a taboo topic anymore nowadays with all the wellness movement, because we realize that we need to have balance. But I must make clear, in Chinese medicine, we're not calling for people to avoid things. We just think the body is robust and they're flexible enough to tolerate different types of emotion, just like different types of diet. You could eat different foods, but it's a sustained and a prolonged state that gets us trouble because we're supposed to be going into different places. Yeah, nowadays we're just stress, or we're just down. But whereas we should actually have a cycle of things. And thank you for explaining bitter and summer. I've also learned something as well. So thank you so much for participating. And yeah, if there are no more questions, I would like to say, essentially, what we wanted to do in Dynamic Balance is to look into our diet, our emotions, and the way we train through the lens of Chinese medicine. And the stuff that I share with you today is actually only included in section 1 because that's the basic language. But ultimately, if we do want to understand the philosophy and apply it to our own lives, we actually have to understand that our diet, our emotions, and our training are inseparably linked. But in order to understand that, you have to understand what we talked about today. So as you move forward in this week, I would encourage you to just be more observant of your body condition and kind of your responses from eating different foods. Because I can guarantee you, eating salmon and eating steak elicits different responses from the body. So you just have to be more aware. Other than that, again, I'd love to hear from you, your feedback. Please feel free to send me a message through email. You can find me on Instagram, tag me. You can go on my website, and I'd love to hear from you.